Let's start our news bulletin in Brazil, where 679 more people have died from COVID-19, with the tally crossing 37,000. The U.S. has recorded 477 deaths in the past 24 hours, taking the toll there to nearly 111,000. Worldwide, the death count has crossed 406,000, while infections are over 7.1 million. More on that now in this report.
The number of global deaths and confirmed cases of the new coronavirus continues to soar, with no immunization in sight. But President Donald Trump is heading for a speedy reopening of the U.S. economy, despite warnings of a second wave. The state of California says it can reopen cinemas by Friday if people follow guidelines to curb the spread of COVID-19. The World Health Organization has warned that the pandemic situation in Central and South America is the most complicated.
What we're seeing from Mexico all the way through to Chile is an increasing pattern across the Americas, across Latin America, with some notable exceptions. But I think this is a time of great concern. It's a time in which we need strong government leadership in Latin America.
While the debate over COVID-19 lockdowns continues, a study has revealed the lockdown saved more than 3 million lives in Europe. In Indonesia, Jakarta's governor Anies Baswedan said he is confident that coronavirus is under control to safely reopen the capital. Russia, too, has allowed people to resume international travel despite a surge in cases across the country.
A government decree was signed which will give Russian citizens the opportunity to leave the country to care for sick relatives living in other countries, as well as those traveling for work or study. It would also be possible for Russian citizens who need to get medical treatment abroad.
After New Zealand, Tanzania has also declared that the East African country is COVID-19 free. President John Magufuli attributed the claimed success to prayers and fasts that the citizens have offered to God.
Pakistan has reported its highest single-day death toll from coronavirus, with 105 fatalities. This takes the tally to 2,172. The health ministry says the number of cases in the country has risen to more than 108,000, as 4,646 tested positive overnight. The ministry said 35,018 patients of coronavirus have recovered so far. Officials said the province of Punjab has reported over 40,000 cases, while Sindh has reported more than 39,000 cases. Pakistan has taken a strong exception to Indian Home Minister Amit Shah's statement on carrying out a surgical strike inside Pakistan. Foreign Minister Shah Qureshi said India will get a befitting response to any misadventure. In a statement, Qureshi said India must not remain in a fool's paradise and must remember Pakistan's response to its earlier misadventures. Qureshi said the international community should take notice of the Indian desire to escalate the situation with Pakistan. He asked Amit Shah to tell what was stopping India from carrying out a surgical strike in Ladakh. The foreign minister said Delhi was trying to shift the blame of its failures onto Pakistan. Qureshi said the situation in occupied Kashmir was deteriorating by the day. Pakistan has also strongly condemned the extrajudicial killing of 9 more civilians by Indian forces in occupied Kashmir. In a statement, the Foreign Office said occupation forces are massacring the Kashmiri people in fake encounters with complete impunity. It said Delhi's efforts to subjugate Kashmiris have failed in the past and will not succeed in the future. Responding to Indian statements, spokesperson Aisha Farooqi said New Delhi must remember Pakistan's swift response to its previous misadventure. She said last February, Pakistan's capability and resolve were clearly demonstrated. The U.S. has invited China to the latest round of nuclear talks between Washington and Moscow. In a tweet, U.S. President Donald Trump's envoy for arms control, Marshall Billingslea, said Washington expects Beijing to show up and negotiate in good faith. This comes as the decades-old nuclear arms agreement between Washington and Moscow, the New START Treaty, is set to expire in February. The Trump administration remains keen on involving China in the trilateral dialogue, despite Beijing's stated lack of interest. Earlier on Monday, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said the White House was obsessed with China. Russia and the U.S. are estimated to possess thousands of nuclear weapons. China is said to have the world's third largest nuclear arsenal with about 300 nukes. U.S. sanctions on Iran's shipping network and its Chinese subsidiary have taken effect after they were announced in December. Washington accused the shipping network of supporting proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has threatened curbs on anyone working with Iran's shipping lines and its Shanghai-based subsidiary eSail Shipping Company. He said any entities involved with the networks risk contributing to Iran's proliferation-sensitive programs. Pompeo asked governments around the world to investigate activity by the shipping entities in their ports and seas. The State Department has accused IRISL of repeatedly transporting items related to Iran's ballistic missile and military programs. The Iraqi Revolutionary League claims it has shot down a U.S. military transport plane in Baghdad. However, U.S. military spokesperson Miles Kaggans has denied that claim, saying the plane overshot the runway and crashed into a wall. Kaggans said 4 servicemen were injured in the crash with limited damage to infrastructure and equipment. He said the incident was being investigated, but any enemy activity was not suspected. Meanwhile, the Iraqi military has confirmed that a rocket has landed in the perimeter of Baghdad International Airport. The military said the rocket was launched from an area to the south of the airport, but there were no casualties. Russia has carried out airstrikes in the de-escalation zone in Syria's Idlib, killing at least 3 civilians. A Syrian civil defense group and Turkish state media said 3 others were wounded in the attacks. Witnesses said that more than 20 airstrikes targeted 5 villages at 2 different locations in Syria. They said hundreds of civilians fled, fearing a wider resumption of airstrikes in the last rebel bastion. These were the first strikes since a Turkish-Russian deal produced a ceasefire over 3 months ago. The EU says it cannot accept any alternative to the inclusive political solution of the Berlin process for Libya. In an interview, the bloc's spokesperson on foreign policy, Peter Stano, said a solution must be in line with the UN-led course. Earlier, Russia backed Egypt's peace plan for Libya, which proposes an elected leadership council and a ceasefire. Calling proposals put forward by Cairo as comprehensive, Moscow said they could serve long overdue negotiations between the opposing sides. This comes as government troops and Khalifa Haftar-led forces are engaged in fierce fighting for the strategic city of Sirte. Interior Minister Fatih Bashagha said the government will engage in political talks only after taking Sirte and the inland Jufra airbase. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan says he has discussed the conflict in Libya with the U.S. President Donald Trump in a phone call. In an interview, Erdogan said a new era between Ankara and Washington may start after that discussion. The Turkish president said a new era can begin in bilateral relations on the transition process in Libya. Erdogan said he will speak with Russian President Vladimir Putin about Moscow's claims that it does not have any soldiers in Libya. He alleged that Moscow has warplanes in Libya and Ankara will plan further after its conversation with Putin. Meanwhile, a White House statement said the 2 leaders also discussed Syria and the wider eastern Mediterranean region. In the U.S., thousands have braved the sweltering heat to bid farewell to George Floyd, whose death in custody ignited worldwide protests against systemic racism and police brutality. Demonstrations have continued for the 14th day as demands to defund or abolish police departments gather force. In Minneapolis, a judge raised former Minnesota cop Derek Chauvin's bail to $1.25 million, with his second court appearance scheduled for June 29th. Elsewhere in Washington, congressional Democrats introduced sweeping legislation to reform and restrain the under-fire police department. The legislation proposes to make lynching a federal hate crime and to allow the public to sue law enforcement for damages, ending the legal doctrine of qualified immunity. The bill will also ban chokeholds, necessitate body cameras, restrict the use of lethal force, and facilitate independent probes of police misconduct. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey echoed U.S. President Donald Trump's rejection of defunding the police.
We need to see a culture shift in the department. A big part of seeing that culture shift through is being able to both discipline as well as terminate individuals who have had some form of wrongful conduct. That needs to happen. And so if the question is, if we're reimagining entirely what the Minneapolis Police Department looks like, I am entirely in favor of it. However, as I've mentioned previously, I'm not for abolition of the police department.
France has announced plans to ban a chokehold method used by police to detain suspects as part of the government's efforts to address police brutality. In a press conference, the Interior Minister, Christophe Castanet, said the chokehold method would no longer be taught in police schools. Castanet said France has zero tolerance for racism in law enforcement and it has no place in society. Castanet also said more police officers will be equipped with body cameras while carrying out their duties. The move came in reaction to outcries over police brutality worldwide following the custodial death of George Floyd.
I want zero tolerance against racism in our country. I want everyone to know that when one wears their uniform, the blue uniform of law, one can never put himself above it. On the contrary, one owes himself more than anyone else to be exemplary.
I'll be back after this break with plenty more news. Stay tuned. Welcome back. China has urged Australia to take concrete measures to ensure the safety, rights and interests of Chinese citizens in the country. In a news conference, the Foreign Ministry said there has been an increase in discrimination against Chinese in Australia. On Friday, Beijing advised its citizens not to travel to Australia amid an increase in anti-Chinese sentiments caused by COVID-19. The Australian government, though, has refuted those charges, saying the country is a safe destination for millions of tourists each year. However, the Australian Human Rights Commission has said the COVID-19 pandemic led to a spike in racism targeting Asian Australians. It said racist attacks on the home of a Chinese Australian family happened 3 times in 1 week in April. The state anti-discrimination body in New South Wales has also received 241 official complaints in the first 4 months of this year. South Korea says it will continue to abide by the agreement with North Korea. This comes after Pyongyang did not answer a routine daily call to the Inter-Korean Liaison Office. South Korea's Ministry of Unification said the routine calls and military hotlines are basic means of communication between the neighboring countries. Seoul said it was the first time that the North has not answered military phone calls from the South since the hotlines were restored in 2018. Earlier, North Korea had vowed to cut off all inter-Korean communication lines in anger over anti-Pyongyang leaflets sent from the South. North Korean defectors and anti-Pyongyang activists often send balloons carrying leaflets criticizing the communist regime and its leader. Turkey says 2 people have been killed and 8 others wounded in a terrorist attack in Çatak district of Van province. Van Governor Mehmet Bilmez said the workers were killed after a roadside bomb planted by PKK exploded. Bilmez said the explosion occurred on a road near the Narli neighborhood. He said the vehicle was carrying road workers back home. Numerous security forces and emergency personnel were dispatched to the scene. The Ivory Coast's Rapid Graph Forest Reserve is a protected area and an important front line in the global fight against climate change. Illegal cocoa plantations are a major cause of the massive deforestation that's taken place over the last 50 years. More in this report.
Decades of intensive cocoa farming have made the Ivory Coast the world's top chocolate producer, but it has also wiped out its tropical forests. Tasked with overseeing the protection of some 130,000 hectares of land, a forestry officer and a small team of 5 guards. A small river and a wooden bridge mark the forest reserve's boundary. A sign informs passers-by that hunting and clearing land is forbidden. Beyond this limit lies an illegal plantation. The aging stumps on the original forest is still visible among the stubby cocoa trees. A global environment protection campaign group, Mighty Earth, has shared graphics and satellite maps that have revealed the stark loss in Ivory Coast's forest since 1990.
Why have this map?
Develop a joint monitoring mechanism to end deforestation, but data shows progress has been very slow. Between 1960 and 2015, the country lost around 70% of its forest cover, much of it transformed into cocoa plantations.
We need to act. It's an emergency today. Because if we don't act quickly, we risk losing the entirety of our forests. Already 90% of our primary forests in Ivory Coast have been lost between 1960, when we gained independence, until 2000, so in the space of half a century. Today we talk of 2 million hectares of forests that remain. Others say up to 3 million. But the most important thing is that we have lost an enormous amount of our forests. What must we do? We must wake up and stop deforestation. After that, we must make reparations. Everyone is affected. Unfortunately, our feeling is that not every effort is being made.
The country's new forestry policy is trying to reverse the loss. It is focusing on taking back control of government-managed parks and forest reserves. The government forestry policy has also planned European Union legislation, and stricter supply chain monitoring is coming together in an effort to reverse the damage.
There is speculation around the number. No number has been verified. It is said that 30% of production from Ivory Coast comes from illegal zones or protected zones. We don't have the numbers yet. We will make sure to get them, and more specifically, we want it to stop. That is our goal. We are conscious, ready and determined to ensure no cocoa comes from illegal zones.
The study group commends the government's reinforced policy to protect forests, but warned that without rigorous follow-ups, it will be difficult to save what is left.
Hundreds of Moscow residents have rushed to an open-air book fair in the Red Square despite COVID-19 restrictions in place. Organizers said they will implement various measures to halt the spread of the virus, but still, many publishers have opted out to stay away from the fair. More in this report.
Weary of lockdown, Moscow's residents invigorate the Red Square. Clad in face masks and gloves, book clans have crowded to the first large gathering after the outbreak. Despite criticism, the book fair is largely seen as a small sign of gradual efforts to open the Russian capital back up amid the pandemic. Around 180 publishers displayed their stalls at the fair, which drew up to 600 visitors within hours. The fair's organizers said they have assured the required measures to safeguard people's safety. Chairs were placed 1 meter apart, and people's temperatures were checked at the entrance.
We think it is very important now to provide a good mood for our readers as the life slowly returns to normal. Of course, we stick to all the safety requirements. As you can see, we all are wearing gloves and masks, all the staff. The salesperson also wear protection screens. We have sanitizers everywhere. We clean up regularly. Everything is tightly controlled.
Along with social distancing measures, officials ordered sanitation of the site and mandatory use of face masks and gloves.
We are not afraid. Of course, we stick to all the quarantine rules. The law makes us to, but we do not panic. The weight is being blown now.
The event was criticized from those who considered it an early jab toward the reopening of social events.
The self-isolation regime in Moscow has been prolonged until June 14. People need passes to leave their homes. They have schedules to go for a walk. I do not think that holding a festival at such a time is logical.
Russia has nearly 460,000 confirmed coronavirus cases so far. Lockdown restrictions will remain in place in Moscow until at least June 14th.
Saudi Arabia says Iraq has pledged to cut its oil output steeper than its OPEC quota of July to September. In a news conference, the Saudi Energy Minister Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman said Baghdad failed to deliver on pledged cuts from May to June. The minister did not say what will happen if Iraq fails to deliver on its promises from July onwards. He added that Riyadh will boost output in July while ending voluntary deeper cuts amid signs of a global demand recovery. Meanwhile, Norway's oil ministry said it has no plans to modify its existing plans for production cuts following the OPEC Plus agreement. The American National Bureau of Economic Research has officially declared that the U.S. has entered an economic recession. The ruling puts a formal end to what had been more than a decade of economic expansion, the longest in U.S. history. The U.S. economy contracted 5% in the first quarter of the year as the country deals with the COVID-19 fallout. In a statement, the NBER said an unprecedented decline in employment and production warrants this designation. The Bureau typically defines a recession as an economic contraction that lasts for more than a few months. It has declared 12 recessions since 1948, the longest of which was the Great Recession, which lasted 18 months from December 2007 to June 2009. Time now to find out what the weather is like around the world. For the latest updates on these and other stories, you can always follow us on our social media at Indus.News. Thanks for watching.